Welcome to EDD 918, Module 7. And in this module, we'll be talking about systems thinking and then getting into complexity thinking as well. And hopefully you've got the slides there in front of you. And we'll start in this first couple of lectures talking about this concept of systems thinking and then how do we apply it to organizations. Systems thinking is kind of came about. Peter Senge is the, I guess, best known individual for taking the concepts of systems thinking and especially applying it to organizations. His book is one that was an option for you for the book report. You may have read it. It's The Fifth Discipline. I've read this a few times. I find his information very interesting. And I would just say this. I know, especially in the healthcare world, many of you are like, what's the most recent? What's the most recent? What's the most current? When it comes to organizational theory, the classics are often the best. And so you'll notice sometimes I use a little bit older articles. That's because a lot of times people are just repeating what has already been said. And Senge, even though this book was written in the 90s, the reality is organizations are still struggling through how to apply it. And I don't mean because his stuff isn't good. I mean, they're realizing we still aren't operating this way. So it's easy to dismiss some of the older things and say, well, we want what's newest. Senge and many others in the organizational world have stood the test of time. So that's why, again, he's still being read, being implemented. His systems thinking are still being discussed and talked about. And a lot of it was rooted in some work, and he references him in his book, Chris Argyris, a Harvard researcher and organizational theorist. And he did a lot of work with what's called single loop learning and double loop learning. And those are feedback systems, and I think I'll talk about them in one of the later lectures. But basically the idea that Argyris found out was most organizations, most of us as people even, we use single loop learning, meaning I'm not really seeking good feedback, or I just want one piece of feedback and then I kind of consider it, rather than this ongoing double loop is kind of that figure eight, so to speak. So we keep going and going and going. And so building on that, as well as then tapping into biology, anatomy, physiology, those sciences, Senge kind of really started seeing things like systems, how our organizations are actual systems, just like the human body and other things are. And the problem is, too often with our organizations, we still have the mechanistic view. And what I mean by that is we may not do factory work anymore, like you saw with the Charlie Chaplin video. And again, it's easy for us to say, well, we're out of classical management. Nobody uses that. When in reality, we do a lot. And what happens too is a lot of times what we find in our organizations, we have the mechanistic view in that we look at our unit, our division, our team, however your organization is split up, and we only look at what's going on there. And we don't consider how does our section interact with other departments and other factors and things like that. I know, having taught at a liberal arts college, you have the liberal arts core. And we, in the communication area, we had one of the core classes, actually a couple of the core classes regarding communication. And it was always kind of a struggle when I was division chair, when we would have to engage in conversations with the other academic departments, because they were very focused on their major and what it required. And we were trying to say, okay, but how do these courses, they're required, and to them it was almost like, well, that's just an add-on. It's like, no, we want to make sure that this course is meeting your needs and is helping your students with their major. And so again, just that kind of systems thinking. And so, like I said, too often we still have the mechanistic view, and I'm going to tweak or fix something in my area. And what we don't realize is, or don't think through, well, if I make this change in my area, how does that impact the system as a whole. And we'll get into that more as we go along. Now, one thing that Senge identifies in his book, The Fifth Discipline, are the 7 learning disabilities. And that's what I want to go through in this first lecture. And we'll move through pretty quickly. So I guess fasten your seatbelts a little bit. But he talks about these as learning disabilities, meaning for an organization, it stands in the way of us becoming what he considers the fifth discipline, and it's the subtitle of the book, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization. And so that to him is kind of, I guess, the highest level, so to speak. It's not necessarily a hierarchy, but we want to become a learning organization. And we'll get to that in a lecture as well, because it's not necessarily what we think of. And I want to hedge because there's so much I want to say about that, but I'll wait. So what he's talking about when he says these are learning disabilities, these are the things that get in the way of us as individuals within organizations and can be a problem for an organization as a whole, that would prevent them from learning and from becoming a learning organization. And so you'll see on the first slide, there's 4 of them, and then there are 3 on the next one. Again, I'm going to walk through these fairly quickly and try not to be too long in this lecture. So the first one is, I am my position, and that's what it sounds like. And basically the idea is this. This is where the workers in an organization, the employees, the associates, team members, whatever term you want to use, it's how am I defined? I am defined by my task specifically. Now, is it important that an individual has task clarity in their job? Absolutely. A person will struggle. If I don't know what I'm supposed to do in my job, then I'm going to struggle. I'm going to have job dissatisfaction. We talked about motivation, rewards, things like that. So task clarity is important. We're not saying that. But the idea here is I only define myself by my very limited view. So if you teach in a college setting, what is your job? My job is to teach, EDD 918. That's my job. Well, no, it's not, because EDD 918 is part of the EDD program, and how does it interact with the other courses? And then how is that part of Clarkson College as a whole and what we offer, right? And so you see how it grows out from there. So one learning disability is where all the people, or most of the people in your organization, they're defined by their position. That's all they think about, and that's that very limited, siloed, mechanistic view. The second one is the enemy is out there, and this is an interesting one. And I think we see this in organizations more than we maybe want to admit. And it's this: when a problem arises, instantly we try to identify literally the problem comes from without. And Senge's point is we're not taking ownership of what do we contribute. So again, a college setting, university setting, enrollments are going down. Well, especially right now, what are we hearing about? And by the way, let me say this: these things are true. These things are true of society as a whole. What we know is the birth rate decreased, and so now we're kind of hitting that, instead of a baby boom, that baby decline, right? And so birth rates have dropped, and that's now catching up to where students normally traditional age go off to college. So that impacts. COVID, people are still talking about that, and some students got a little bit behind, and it was a bad experience, and now they're playing catch up, and are they going to go to college? There's an increased focus and need in trades and things like that. So fewer students are going to college because they're realizing I don't necessarily need a 4-year degree to do what I want to do. And they're right? I mean, that's appropriate. The rising costs. Right? So we want to look at all of these things external. Now, again, for college enrollment, are those things true? Yes. But we don't want to just dismiss and say, nothing we can do, or because again, the enemy is out there, rather than saying, well, wait a minute, because there are some colleges that are seeing increased enrollments even during this time. Okay, so maybe is our process too difficult to get in? And right, so are we not marketing enough? There's all kinds of questions that we could ask. So instead of the enemy is out there, we look at our own contribution. The third one is interesting, the illusion of taking charge. And kind of the idea is this, and Senge says this is a quote from his book. um, Proactivity is in vogue, and this is the idea. Especially leaders have to be careful about this. And it's the, all right, we got a problem. I'm going to roll up the sleeves, go in there, and I'm going to fix this problem. Well, wait a minute. Do we actually know what the problem is? And Senge's point is sometimes proactivity is actually just reactivity, or being reactive disguised, right? Because especially as leaders, right, this is where we want to take charge and we want to fix it. For those of us who are parents, I think we can identify this when our child has a problem. Boy, there's that tendency we want to jump in and fix it. Well, wait a minute. Do we actually know the real problem? And the truth is, especially as leaders and as parents, sometimes we need to encourage others to fix the problem and to identify what the problem is, because that's how they're going to learn. And so we have to be careful about just taking charge because it looks good. And if you think about a company that is publicly owned and publicly traded, right? This can be a real problem for them that maybe we don't have in our worlds, but because stockholders are going, hey, we want you to do something about this. And so sometimes it can lead to the bad behaviors. But the same could be true for colleges, nonprofit colleges, things like that. Because again, enrollment's declining. The board's going, hey, what's going on? And leadership could maybe, well, we're going to take charge. We're going to fix this. But do we know what the problem is? And then fourth is a fixation on events. And what we have going on here is where I only look at this isolated event. And the point is this, the reason why this gets in the way of our learning is if I'm only looking at isolated events, I'm not looking at the patterns. I'm not looking at the system. And therefore, I'm not actually trying to identify what are root causes, what are some things going on here, how could we maybe fix it better, things like that. I just get fixated on the event itself rather than how is it part of the bigger picture. And then moving on and quickly hit on these last three. The parable of the boiled frog. You've probably heard this. I'm guessing this one's been around for quite some time. And it relates to change. And the idea is this. It's a little bit gruesome for the frog. But if you take a frog and you have a boiling pot of water and you put the frog in the pot of water, he's going to hop out, right? Because it's hot. It burns him and he's going to react to that. But if you put the frog in water and slowly increase the temperature over a period of time, the frog will stay in the water. And eventually he will be boiled to death because the change is slow. And so the idea is this. If some monumental thing happens, we react and we deal with it. Again, I know it's been 5 years now, but COVID, we're still talking about, there's still ramifications. But COVID rocked our world, right? It was instant, it was big, it was huge, and everybody's reacting to it. And so that one, we all saw that change, and we reacted and responded. Well, what about those slow changes? Again, I keep harping on enrollment. I don't know, maybe it's just because it's that time of year when everybody's talking about enrollment in colleges. But think about it this way. If you teach in a classroom and it's full one semester, the next semester, I have a couple of empty seats. And then the next semester, now we're down 5 students, right? You're noticing it, but it's not a major concern. Then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a minute, this is happening across the board. And now our enrollment is down as a whole, and therefore financially we're feeling it, right? But we didn't recognize it for maybe a few years. So that's the idea of the parable of the boiled frog. So we need to be paying attention to things going on. Does that mean we react? Again, we want to be careful. We don't overreact and that take charge and, oh my goodness, I'm down 1 student in my class. What's going on? And I charge down to enrollment and admissions. No. But we're noticing, and then we start and we want to have conversations. And a lot of the 5th discipline idea is behind, are we having dialogue within our organizations? 6th one, delusion of learning from experience. This is one of my favorite ones because when I worked in the organizational setting, part of my job was to coach individuals through learning experiences, learning opportunities. And what Senge is really driving at here is this. We would set up for our high potential leadership candidates, we would set up learning experiences. So, and I don't mean false ones, but like they would take over a new team in an area where they weren't really skilled, just to learn a different part of the business. And I'd meet with them and talk with them along the way. What are you learning? What are you getting out of this? And that's good, but they're learning from the experience. But the problem that we often have in our organizations is, so we might learn from that experience, so to speak, in the moment, and this kind of goes back to that focus on events. But the problem is, what about the long-term effects? And this was an increasing problem in the organization where I worked, because some of the leadership candidates, they were trying to move them through so quickly. Some of them never saw the negative impacts of decisions they made. So they would come on to a team or work on a project so that they could learn some experience. And we're like, great, they got that experience. Move them on. And 2 years later, we realized these changes they made, they weren't so good. They had negative effects. Well, by then that person's like now 2 or 3 levels higher. They don't care. They're not being touched by it because, it's not like going to crash the organization, but it had some negative effects on people and things like that. And especially this organization, it was, nationwide. So that person may now live 5 states away and they won't even know about those bad outcomes if nobody tells them. And so this is where, just because we learn in the moment, we've got to think through and be paying attention. Wait a minute, are we learning as a whole? And so for an organization, we're experiencing this negative or this problem or this challenge now. We may want to walk that back a few years and say, hey, what decisions were made 2, 3, 5 years ago that are now impacting us today and causing this, because we want to learn from that. So that's that delusion of learning from experience. And then finally, the myth of the management team. And it isn't that management teams don't exist. The idea is that they're not acting like a team. And this is the concept where, again, problems happen, problems arise in organizations, and a management. So in my division, I'm not viewing myself as part of the team of the organization as a whole. We're gonna lock in and we're gonna defend our territory and defend our turf and make ourselves look better and blame other people and things like that, rather than working as a whole, because I see the organization as an entire system. So again, that goes back to that limited thinking and the closed off thinking. So those are the learning disabilities that Senge identified in organizations that can get in the way of them becoming a learning organization. So now in the next lectures, we'll get into the systems thinking and his concepts about the disciplines that work as a system and that lead you into a learning organization.